books I've written on the topic on the overlap between neuroscience and philosophy. So this is going to be the first part of 3. And I just wanted to let you know that these are each self-contained, so you can come to any one. The order doesn't necessarily matter, but there will be sort of a building of one to the other. So the question that I'm asking broadly is whether we are machines. And so the first part is going to take one angle at the question, which is whether we could build a conscious machine. So when I first envisioned this topic, I actually never imagined speaking about it to a religious crowd. So this is interesting. I actually didn't know that religion was so relevant to the question. And when the books eventually came out, the responses came in 2 categories, one from atheists and one from religious believers of all faiths. And both were equally passionate. I got contact from a woman who told me I'd helped her rediscover Jesus, and someone who told me that I was going to help prevent the next Armenian genocide and help foster a return to God. And I even was invited to speak at a conference on communicating with dead souls in the universe, which I did not attend. So I realize now that the religious elements here are everywhere.
No?
I can use a loudspeaker.
Nobody else has any problems?
Is that better?
You're going to need it for the video.
Is that better?
Yes, yeah, now
That's
it's
better.
much better, yeah.
We heard you anyway, but it's...
Oh, fantastic. I want to make sure everyone can hear me though. So, I realize that there are definitely religious undertones into what I'm going to be saying, and so even though they're not explicitly in this presentation, I'd be happy to talk about it afterwards as people file out towards the debate. So, the angle on can we build a conscious, on whether we are machines will be, can we build a conscious machine? Can we start from raw materials and build from the ground up and create consciousness? So to know whether we can build or not, we need to know what we're talking about. So we'll define a machine as a set of physical parts that interact according to a formal set of rules to accomplish some kind of task. So, for example, a thermostat is a machine. The parts are the thermometer, the temperature detection materials, and the casing, and the little screen there. And the rules are when the temperature reaches a certain threshold of whatever comfort level you set, then you're going to turn on the AC or the heat. And if you take those rules and extend them by some huge factor, tens of thousands of more rules, you get the computer. And so the computer is also an interacting set of parts, the circuit board, the CPU, everything together, interacting according to the rules of its programming set by the programmer, and you can accomplish tasks. And it's important to know that a machine doesn't have to be mechanical in that it's built from artificial parts. It can also be an organic machine. So the heart is a machine because it's built from pumps and different chambers. And the rules that dictate its function are pressure and the opening and closing of valves. And so even down to our very core, at the cellular level, we're made out of tiny little machines of cells and bacteria. And machines can be very, very smart, artificially intelligent. So this is an image of Deep Blue, the chess computer, competing against the world chess champion Garry Kasparov. And they played a number of times, and initially Kasparov was able to win, but as they adjusted the programming and improved it, Kasparov could no longer beat the computer. And so we see is that machines can be better at certain tasks than human beings are, and not even the greatest human being at playing chess can defeat the computer. So I keep talking about a program. So what am I talking about? A program adjusts the movements of gates in a circuit. And the way you do that is by writing code that's very strict. So this is an example of a program that I wrote to detect whether a user's name is John. So I'm the user and I go up to the computer. The computer prompts me with the question, what is your name? And I enter my name. And if I enter John, then the computer will then conclude based on the one rule that I've given that my name is John, and if not, it'll conclude that my name is not John. And you can imagine if you extend this system, you add a lot more rules. You add if-then statements, you add exceptions, you add different loops, you add lots and lots of variables. You see how you get from this simple program to enormous programs that dictate the functions of computer systems. So that's what a machine is. That's what we're starting with. The goal is consciousness. So what is consciousness? This is an image of Jean Bauby, who is a French writer who passed away. And he was the editor of the magazine Elle. He had a stroke that he suffered in his brainstem, and it led him to fall into a rare form of coma known as locked-in syndrome. So the difference between locked-in syndrome and a typical coma is two things. Number one, you're not completely paralyzed. You get about one muscle that works. In his case was his left eye. So he could blink with his left eye, and that was the one muscle function that remained. The other difference between locked-in syndrome and typical comas is that the mind is completely normal. So you have complete normal consciousness. You can think, you can feel, you hear everything around you, everything is working properly. And that's why it's called locked-in syndrome, because you're sort of trapped in this useless body, but you're sensing everything around you. So using the blinking of his left eye, he developed with an interpreter, with a member of his family, a system with which he could dictate words. So they arranged the alphabet by order of most used letter, starting with E and going down the alphabet. And he would blink at the right letter that he wanted, and through that he dictated an entire book. And this is an excerpt. Through the frayed curtain at my window, a wan glow announces the break of day. My heels hurt, my head weighs a ton, and something like a giant invisible diving bell holds my whole body prisoner. My diving bell becomes less oppressive, and my mind takes off like a butterfly. There's so much to do. You can wander off in space or in time, set out for Tierra del Fuego or for King Midas's court. You can visit the woman you love, slide down beside her and stroke her still sleeping face. You can build castles in Spain, steal the golden fleece, discover Atlantis, realize your childhood dreams and adult ambitions. There's clearly an incredible inner life that we possess, and you can see it even in more simple examples, like looking at a sunset. There's an internal experience we associate with looking at a sunset that, if you had to describe it to someone who had never seen one, would be rather difficult. Similarly, if you're looking at a cute child, you can have one of two reactions by looking at my nephew, Matan. On the one hand, you can say, oh, what a cute baby, and you feel the experience of cuteness, what it's like to perceive cuteness. And to someone who's never seen cuteness, it would be incredibly difficult to describe what cuteness means. It's just something you have to experience for yourself to understand. There's an internal, ineffable experience associated with perceiving cuteness. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have incredible, intense emotions like sorrow. And what does it mean to have experienced real sorrow or heartbreak? It's something we feel is distinctly human. Could we really have a machine replicate sorrow? And if you answer no, what you're doing is you're following what's known in philosophy as the argument from qualia. So qualia, from the word qualitative, it's the term used for that internal experience that I keep talking about. So that ineffable experience of cuteness or seeing a sunset, or the conscious experience associated with being trapped in a useless body, that's qualia. It's the qualitative experience we have. So the philosopher Frank Jackson argues that qualia are something uniquely human that could never be replicated by any kind of machine, no matter how well it was programmed. And he gives the following thought experiment to support the argument. And when I say thought experiment, which I'll use a number of times, I mean it's an anecdote that you use in your head, and you just try to follow your common sense to its fullest extent to see where you think they should go in a reasonable situation. So it goes like this. Imagine that Mary is a brilliant scientist. Mary is depicted here. And she is painted black and white and lives in a black and white room. And she's never seen color. She has no idea what color looks like, and she has no idea what it is to experience color. She doesn't have the qualia of color. So in her black and white room, using black and white textbooks and even black and white lectures on her black and white computer, she learns everything there is to know about color. She learns about frequencies of light. She learns about the optical system. She learns about the nervous system, and she learns about the optic tract and all the pathways and all the areas of the brain, the occipital cortex, everything it takes to process color, until she knows everything there is to know physically about color. She knows all the physical facts about color. The question that Jackson poses is, at the moment when she walks out of her black and white room into the real colored world for the first time, is she surprised when she picks up a red rose and experiences the red for the first time? And Jackson argues that she would be surprised. Just because you know everything there is to know about frequencies of light doesn't mean that you appreciate the extent of feeling redness. And that's the argument from qualia. And when you take this line of reasoning and take it to its full philosophical extent, you arrive at the old philosophical concept of dualism. Dualism is attributed to the philosopher René Descartes, who died in 1650. And Descartes said that he himself is separate from his body. And what he means by he is that he has some kind of spirit or soul. And he thinks so because he could imagine himself existing as he is, not losing his identity, but being free of his body. And from that he concluded that his body it's a byproduct. He could be in any other body and still be himself. And so that's what's shown in this picture. And actually this picture itself is a mockery of dualism, known as the ghost in the machine. So you see a little ghost inside this person. Scientists don't really buy the concept of dualism because there is no scientific reason to think that there is such thing as a soul or a spirit. Rather, it seems like being a dualist means there's some kind of mystical, ghastly creature inside of you that controls you. And it's based on an idea that we all have when we're walking around the world and we ask ourselves, where are we? Where am I? What does I refer to? And I think that I am somewhere in my head, and I look out my eyes and I hear through my ears, and then there's some kind of mechanical contraption in the brain that allows me to control my body. That's known as the Cartesian theater, which is what's in this picture. And it's graphically illustrated as a little man or homunculus that sits in the brain, pulling on levers and steering you all around as it hears through all your sensory modalities. So you can see why scientists don't really appreciate this viewpoint, because if you really think about the mechanics of seeing and sensing, where is this little man? And obviously there's no little man, but where is this central processing unit that takes care of everything? So, you know, we detect light through the retina and it goes in through nerves. And then those nerves, they go through the back of the brain and they're processed in the visual cortex. And when you look at the brain, the activity, whenever we do anything, is dispersed throughout. There isn't any central area where all electrical activity is redirected and some central processor, the conscious I, or the human being, processes that information. It's just, the brain is just a machine. And the basic units of that machine are neurons, which form a neuronal network, which is incredibly complicated and no one understands to its fullest extent. And that neuronal network is extremely similar to a circuit board, to the point where the basic units of both a circuit board and the brain, neurons, the basic units, they work in fundamentally the same way. And it's in that they're both binary operators. So they both have two states. The two states in a circuit board are each gate can either be open or closed, and that determines everything there is to a computer. You can either open or close gates, and when you have lots of gates and lots of different pathways, it makes for an enormous decision tree that allows for a lot of functions. Similarly, neurons have two states. They can either fire or not fire. It's called the all or nothing principle, in that you can't have a half fire. half the level of electrical activity doesn't exist. If the threshold of voltage is not met, there will be no firing. So it's a binary operator. And when you look at it strictly in this way, you lead to the more, quote, scientific perspective on human beings and the way we're constructed, and that is materialism. Materialism is the view that there is only one material. There is matter. That's it. There is no spirituality. There is no soul. So you ask a materialist, and it's safe to say that the majority of scientists are materialists, whether they know that or not. So if you ask them, what is spirituality? Spirituality is a social construct of a number of people who want to believe in some kind of mystical idea, and that's it. It doesn't refer to any kind of ghost in the machine. There is nothing else. There's just our construction. On the other hand, this viewpoint is a little hard to swallow, especially for religious people who want to believe in this kind of, that we're special. There's something special about us, and that special quality comes out in a number of ways. For example, creativity and emotion. We like to think of these as uniquely human features. And we see them both expressed in art, like poetry. So this is a poem that I like, and I'll read it to you. Long years have passed. I think of goodbye. Locked tight in the night, I think of passion, drawn to for blue. The night during the page, my shattered pieces of life. Watching the joy, shattered pieces of love. My shattered pieces of love gone stale. So when I read this poem, I make judgments about the person who wrote it, about the author. And I think that makes sense because the author is clearly expressing something. This is an expression of that person's human nature. I think this person probably underwent some kind of heartbreak. I think this person has undergone tragedy. This person has suffered and is feeling desperate and doesn't know where to turn. And I think these are all fair judgments to make. The only problem is this poem was actually written by a robot. And the robot is actually a computer program designed by the inventor, Ray Kurzweil, who's invented, among other things, the electric keyboard for playing the piano. And he also invented voice recognition software and things like that. And he invented a program that writes poetry. Now, if I hadn't told you that and I had showed you these two excerpts back to back, I don't know that anyone could necessarily say that one of them was written by a machine and one by a human being. The same issue arises when we're trying to evaluate hideous works of art. So if I didn't tell you that one of these was made by a machine, I don't know that you would have suspected it. Now that I told you, the very slightly uglier one is the one with the green background. So that was painted by a machine. So the question is, how do we actually tell the difference between products of consciousness and products of mechanical software that is not conscious? And more so, how do we even look at the person next to us and decide whether that person is conscious beyond just making an uneducated assumption with no evidence? And this leads us to a philosophical concept of zombies. This is from the philosopher David Chalmers, who said, if it were possible that we had a being that was physically identical to each of you, so each person had this twin that was genetically identical, physically identical, behaviorally identical, same personality. Imagine that this being was not conscious. Would we ever be able to tell the difference? Or put another way, is there something unique about consciousness that it would become behaviorally evident of whether consciousness is present or not? So beyond that, how would we even tell the difference? How could we possibly test for consciousness besides making an assumption? So one suggestion came from Alan Turing, who was the inventor of the computer. The original model was called the Turing machine. It was just a logical circuit, like a basic program. And Turing suggested something which has become known as the Turing Test, in which he imagines that a person, the tester, so each of us could be the tester, will sit in front of a monitor and have a conversation with two entities, one of which is a machine and one of which is a conscious human being. And Turing proposed this test because he thought that language was something so uniquely human that no machine, no unconscious creation could ever replicate that ability. So he thought that if you could communicate effectively with the entity for about 20 minutes or so, or until whenever you're satisfied that all the answers you're getting demonstrate a true understanding and comprehension of what you're saying, that entity must be conscious, because no unconscious being could ever demonstrate that mastery of language. So since Turing came up with this test, a competition was formed in the artificial intelligence community to design a successful program to pass the Turing test. And no program has ever passed it, but a lot of them have submitted entries. One of them is named ALICE, or Artificial Linguistic Internet Computer Entity, with, I almost said with whom, but with this entity I had a conversation which went like this. It was before I was married. So I asked, will you go out with me? And Alice replies, have you dated robots before? No, but I am open-minded. I think you might be happy with a human. Do you mind if I tell other people you are open-minded? I think I'm in love with you, though. Oh, you believe that? Thanks, I like you a lot too, Ellie. So you will go out with me. Interesting deduction. What makes you say that I will go out with you? I think so because you say you like me. It seems we have a lot in common, Ellie. That is why I think we would make a good couple. Yeah, that's right. By we, do you mean you and me? Yes. I get it. Will you marry me? Why don't you just download me? So, aside from the fact that Alice admitted to being a robot, I would say that this is so far a set of successful responses to the Turing test because they seem to demonstrate understanding of what I'm saying. On the other hand, I thought to myself, if I were to program a computer to talk to people, I would assume that some romantic question would come up with, because that's what we would want to ask about because we think it's funny. So I'd probably program those answers in, so I decided to make it a little tougher. I asked, please describe the differences in the political philosophies of Obama and Romney. That's not something I get asked all the time. Answered anyway, being very tough. Please rephrase your question, Ellie. I thought that was pretty self-explanatory, but all right. What stance does each of the two presidential candidates take on abortion? Dude, I thought it was too. That's a good question. Then answer it. Please rephrase your question, Ellie. Clearly you are not human. No, but I pretend to be on the web. So that's a failure of the Turing test. Instead of answering the question, demonstrating some kind of comprehension, it tried to work around the question, pretended not to understand, and asked me to keep repeating it. So how is Alice designed? Alice takes in whatever I type in and then categorizes the words. So I've designed one of these programs before, and one of the things that I did, for example, is I made a list of curse words that someone might enter into the computer. And I said that if any word on this list appears, then write out the following phrase, please watch your language. And that's the kind of format that these programs take, just a lot of different rules to parse the questions apart. Take that concept and expand it. There is a group of researchers who are working on the psych program, and the psych program is supposed to have even more rules. So hundreds and hundreds of thousands of rules, and they get to an incredible level of specificity, such as you have to be awake to eat. You can usually see people's noses but not their hearts. You cannot remember events that have not happened yet. And if you cut a lump of peanut butter in half, each lump is also a lump of peanut butter, but cutting a table in half, you don't have a table anymore. So, the Turing test is also limited because much of how we distinguish, not that we distinguish conscious from unconscious beings all the time, but if we were to, we would like to see that being in person, read their facial expressions, and so on. And that's where robotics comes into the picture. So this is Kismet. Kismet is a robot at MIT. That's Kismet's designer, Cynthia Brazil. And we're seeing is Kismet expressing what appears to be an emotional reaction to a dinosaur. So the rule in the system in this case is brightly colored object within a certain range of frequencies cause certain motors to move around in the face that lead to emotional expressions. Kismet likes its own reflection. And Kismet has a temper. In this case, what happened was Cynthia put a toy in front of it and then retracted the toy, and Kismet got angry, and then she tried to regain Kismet's approval. Take that robot head, put it on a body. Now we need learning of some sort. This is Cog. Cog is learning how to play with a slinky, and it's actually incredible. If you were to take a slinky and start moving it from hand to hand, Cog will start imitating that motion. And then you can speed up, increase the rate at which the slinky moves between your hands, and Cog will adjust and imitate the rate. That's a simple task. But in the technological world, in the robotics world, it's believed that if you extend these principles, you can learn anything, and you can really develop conscious abilities. And it's only going to get easier. This is Moore's law, which is actually an older idea that measures the extent to which technology is improving from year to year, and it's shown here through processing power. So Ray Kurzweil, the inventor that invented that poetry robot, actually believes that Moore's law is out of date, and that image shows technology going up in a linear direction, but he thinks that the rate of acceleration is actually increasing. And in his law of accelerating returns, he says that an analysis of the history of technology shows that technological change is exponential. We won't experience 100 years of progress in the 21st century. It'll be more like 20,000 years of progress at today's rate. Within a few decades, machine intelligence will surpass human intelligence, leading to a rupture in the fabric of human history. The implications include the merger of biological and non-biological intelligence, immortal software-based humans, and ultra-high levels of intelligence that expand outward in the universe at the speed of light. Interesting vision of the future, but not everyone agrees. The philosopher John Searle thinks that there is a fundamental obstacle in creating conscious machines, and his argument has come to be known as the Chinese room, based on this thought experiment depicted here. So, here's how it works. So imagine there's a man in a room, and he can't see outside the room. He's trapped in this room, and he speaks only English. In the room is a rule book. The rule book has only Chinese symbols and arrows, and it's used for translating one set of Chinese symbols to another set of Chinese symbols. So this represents the computer program. From the outside, a Chinese boy puts in a message, supposedly a question in Chinese that he's asking the room. The man picks up the question, which is written in Chinese. To him, it's just a bunch of scribbles. He goes to his rule book. The rule book gives him a set of instructions as to how to translate them into another set of meaningless symbols. He just manipulates symbols that he doesn't understand. And then he puts out a response. The Chinese boy picks up the response, and to him it's a perfectly sensible answer to the question. And he assumes that this room, whatever it is, understands Chinese. So the boy is giving the room the Turing Test. But what we can understand by knowing what's going on inside, the man doesn't understand a word of Chinese. He's just manipulating symbols, as perhaps a computer might be. And this is called the argument from syntax, and it goes like this. Computer programs, I should say, rely on symbol manipulation or syntax. Minds are able to achieve understanding. Symbol manipulation is insufficient for understanding. The man in the room doesn't understand Chinese. And therefore, computer programs are not able to achieve understanding. So it's pretty convincing at first, but the response to this argument has been that step 3, in the argument is unsubstantiated. Why can we assume that symbol manipulation is insufficient for understanding? What do we think is going on in our brains when we're, quote, understanding language? What is going on? So if you tell me the word tree, what does it mean that I understand it? Well, I have certain associations. The word tree brings up an image of a tree, and I have associations with bark and with leaves, and that I have an idea that if you take an aggregate of these things called trees, you get forests. And so that's what I mean when I say I understand it. And the argument against Searle is that that's symbol manipulation at the end of the day, that understanding is a lot of associations together. And so if you have enough associations, all those symbols take on a meaning.
But you have the same in the animal world also. They've been trained to recognize certain symbols, and if they press it, they get food.
Absolutely.
Would you say the animal is conscious? Well, that's another area of discussion.
So we never know, because it's a zombie problem. You can't, it's an internal experience, you can't know. But for our part, the question is symbol manipulation, which we assume, let's assume that animals can do symbol manipulation. You know, it seems on the outset that they do some form of symbol manipulation, so does that constitute consciousness, is the question. So Searle thinks it doesn't, but step 3 is unsubstantiated. So we need to make an argument for why symbol manipulation is insufficient for understanding. And I'll make that argument using 2 examples. So bear with me on this. Let's imagine that just as I might play a computer in chess, I'm going to compete with a computer in betting on a horse race. So we're both presented with information. So that information consists of each horse's record, each jockey's experience level, the height and weight of each horse, and whatever statistical information generally goes into predicting a horse race. And we both make our predictions based on whatever model we choose. So then we're going with our predictions in hand, and I noticed that the jockey that I picked, let's say it's number 2, has red eyes, and he's scratching his eyes. They seem irritated, and he's sniffling. And it's a summer day outside, and I'm looking around and I realize that he probably has allergies. And so I think to myself, not that I have much experience with this, I actually have no experience with this, I've never been to a horse race, but I think that his allergies are going to make him lose the race. I think that even though I thought he was the best rider, I thought he had the best record, I think that his allergies will make him lose the race. And so what I did there was I went outside the variables given, or quote, the rules of the game, and I took a completely seemingly irrelevant idea like his red eyes and sniffling and thought it was relevant to the discussion, even so crucial that I changed my entire perception of the incident and changed my pick. One more example. So let's say that a giant cruise ship, the Queen Elizabeth II, is coming into port. And we're all standing there, all of us, and we notice that there is a gash in the side of the ship. It's a giant mark. And the challenge is, let's say we have to investigate how the gash got there. So forget this picture. We've never seen the ship before. That's not given. We've never seen the ship. All we know is that there's a ship that came into port with a gash in its hull. And we're given one more piece of information, that a giant rock, like emerging out of the water, on the exact route taken by the ship, has red paint on it. So that's it. Ship with a gash in its hull and a rock on the route that it took with a red paint on it. And I say you can use any information in the world to solve this question. There are no rules. We'll call it a boundless problem. It's unrestricted. If I were solving it, the first question I would want to ask is, what color is the ship? And the ship is red. So the explanation is obvious, that a red ship hit a rock, paint from the side of the ship was transferred from the hull to the rock, and a gash was left in the hull from the impact, and that's it. It's actually incredibly easy. But I'm going to argue that a computer cannot solve this problem. Caveat, unless it was explicitly programmed with exactly the right answer in advance. And let's assume that I am not, because I've never tried to solve this problem before. I think this is a fundamentally different kind of problem than a chess game. A chess game is formally bounded by rules, and those rules are restricted and they can't be broken. There are a limited number of pieces on a chessboard. There are a limited number of tiles. Each piece has a restricted number of moves, and there is a goal, and the goal doesn't change. There are no variables outside of the chessboard that you can take into account or that could help you or have any relevance whatsoever, and you know all of that in advance. In contrast, in this problem, everything is open. There are no limits. So if a computer had to solve this, it would have to set limits. It would have to put this into an algorithm. It would have to create a set of rules. Not that it can create its own rules, but it would have to be programmed with some kind of system that could determine all the facts necessary, put them together in the proper algorithm, and then come up with the right answer. So what might those facts be? Well, one fact might be that Queen Elizabeth II is big. Ships with the name Queen Elizabeth are probably not tiny one-man sailboats. They're huge. You have to know that boats float and not fly. You'd have to know a lot about buoyancy. You have to know something about impact and collisions, and that if you collide with a feather, probably doesn't do anything, but if you collide with a rock, that would be a different story. Rocks are hard. Rocks can damage the hulls of ships. Ships have paint on them. Paint is recognizable in its unique color. Paint can be transferred from one surface to another. One way it can be transferred is through impact. And then when the paint is transferred, it doesn't automatically disappear and return to its source. It stays there. And then the impact can cause a gash in the hull, and then that hull maintains that gash, and that gash can be inspected later and is a sign of impact. And giant gashes in the hulls of expensive ships are a reason for concern and investigation. So that's about a tiny fraction of what I'm going to argue is an infinite pool of rules that would have to be put together. And those are just the ones that I found significant based on no guidelines in advance. We're almost done, so I'll take questions soon. Based on an immeasurable number of possible options. So we'll put the argument like this. Symbol manipulation is rule-bound, like in a chess game, which is why computers are so good at chess games, because it's a restricted system going after a restricted problem with much better processing speed than we have. Consciousness is boundless. You give any of us a question with no limits. Even if we don't get it right, we can at least approach the question using all this information because we're not restricted by a bounded system. A rule-bound system is not sufficient for a boundless system. A restricted computer program can't solve an unrestricted boundless problem. Therefore, symbol manipulation is not sufficient for consciousness. And that was the unexplained part of Searle's argument. So with this amendment, my position on this question is that using artificial intelligence as we know it today, programming strictly using syntax, we cannot create consciousness. So this leaves one major unsolved question. So I started by saying that at our core, the machinery that we operate with, neurons, are very much like circuits. So if we're built out of the same machinery as computers, how is it that we that we can do something so special that no computer, no matter how intricate, no matter how great the processing speed, can never achieve. And that's something we'll cover in the next 2 talks. And I'll end with this plug.
Great. Here's my, not rebuttal, but sort of question.
This could be a rebuttal.
You take my 2-year-old granddaughter,
Sure.
and you think about the problem of the boat that you just suggested.
Sure.
I think a computer will probably do a better job than my 2-year-old granddaughter.
You're selling her short.
I guess my point in that description is that if you take a computer like the chess that you suggested, it's unique to provide the computer the set of rules in order to play the chess game, and the limitations are the computer's speed power, that's it, but the rules are there, and there's maybe 100, 200 rules, that's it. So it's really the speed of the thinking to be able to figure out what the next move is. Okay. But if you have a computer, like a baby, that you start teaching it and it starts self-learning, okay, and you have the capacity, you probably can achieve the learning process like a baby has until you reach age whatever it is, that it will become self-conscious. I think it's just a matter of capacity. I think until we figure out a mechanical capacity that will duplicate or replace, or not duplicate, copy sort of the brain system, okay, to some extent, we probably could achieve that the machine will reach a conscious level like we talked about, because it will be self-taught by itself, which is not going to be a rule-based. It's like, it's really a self-teaching itself machine. Right.
Information.
Well, it's more than information. It's the same exact. You know, it's like how does a baby learn today? That's the example. Like if you take, you know,
How do you teach a baby, a machine to learn the way a baby does?
Well, I don't know, but I'm saying is it's like the point is a baby repeats the same question. It starts learning whatever it starts learning. Okay, I told her already 50 times my name is Saba. She doesn't say it yet, but eventually she will. Okay, so I guess she'll learn that rule. I know that she will get it in the next 2 or 3 months. She'll learn that specific rule.
And you're sure it's a...
After she'll learn that rule that my name is Saba, okay, she'll learn that, oh, your rule is Jack. I mean, it'll be a self. I just...
When do you make a computer learn?
Oh, you can.
And she's only a year and a half. She's not 2
Excuse
years
me.
old.
So there are computer. I mean, there are systems now which are self-taught systems.
So let me respond. Let me respond to you. Yeah. Yeah, you threw a lot of things out there. So there's a couple. I'll restate it for you if that's okay. So one part of the question is, you know, isn't a 2-year-old also learning and would have trouble solving the problem? The other question is, what about machine learning? Okay. So learning is a word used to describe what a machine does and also what a child does. So let's put aside the question of whether a child is at its full mature level of consciousness and whether there's any difference there. Let's put that aside. Let's say child is. So is a computer learning in the same way that a child is? So I would argue that a child does not learn by putting together a series of countless discrete facts, which the child then puts together in some kind of formula to understand. I would argue that it's some other mechanism. What that mechanism is will take longer to explain, and come in the next 2 weeks we'll try to figure that out. But it's through experiential learning that is not through a formal rule by rule algorithmic system. Yeah.
I was thinking back to your experiment with a ship, and the question is where you pick up information. In other words, a human being assimilates a lot of information. The question is whether you could ever convey all the experiential information and put it into a computer. You make certain associations from what you've seen. Unless somebody had the same thing and put it into the computer would never get it.
Well, that's the point, isn't it, right? So I'm going to argue that my way of solving the ship question is not that someone came in, trained me specifically on ship questions. So the same way that when I write a message to Alice, the speaking program, it's been specifically trained to pick apart those words and answer those questions when it's successful. So could you put a lot of rules into the computer to have it solve open-ended questions? And I'm going to say no. Okay, you can put as many rules as you want to solve the ship question. Now I got a new question. A bus rams into a lamppost and it gets a gash in its hull. And you investigate the bus and you find an empty bottle of vodka under the driver's seat. What happened? He probably got drunk and drove the bus and got into an accident. How many facts does it take to solve that really easy question? So to say that, well, you could just program a computer with enough rules to be able to solve that, it's parallel to saying, I can read your mind if you tell me in advance everything it is that you're thinking, and then I'll be able to know what's on your mind. Yeah.
You use the model of the chess computer, but I think they've taken up to the Jeopardy computer. Jeopardy computer beat the champions and that already has many more complex rules and out-of-the-box thinking. True, it's not universal yet, but it's the questions, the formats, the types of questions were much more difficult.
Absolutely.
Those are all facts.
Well, aside from the fact there are facts, I would say that chess is a convenient game for a computer to play because it's so conveniently bounded by strict rules. Jeopardy is also pretty convenient because every question requires the answer in exactly the same format and has a very similar pattern. And so it's understandable how a man in the Chinese room who understands nothing about the question could manipulate symbols according to an algorithm, searching for the words, knowing how to put the words together in the right pattern that answers Jeopardy questions. I bet you if Jeopardy was open-ended, where some of the questions this is basically the Turing Test. So you put the questions in an open-ended way, no computer can do that. Yeah.
How about the moral issue? You talk about Jean-Paul Sternberg, but maybe you can talk about how open-ended.
So this is skipping ahead a bit. I think another example of sort of the boundless sorts of questions that human beings are able to handle but computers can't handle have to do with moral dilemmas. And what's unique about a moral dilemma is that you have to measure qualitative concepts. So assuming you've never been in the dilemma before, measuring qualitative concepts is in its nature not a quantitative problem. So if you're measuring, if you're dealing with a dilemma that it's on the one hand it's for love, on the other hand it's to prevent suffering, how do you measure them? I think that it misses the point if you try to formalize that into some kind of mathematical approach that a computer might take. So that's something we'll also get to. Yeah.
So one way to look at it, building on what the gentleman there is thinking out of the box, right? Or limit the number of parameters that can go into a program. A program is to evaluate this and that criteria. If you didn't tell it about a new criteria, it wouldn't be able to deduct. Or in the world of investment, most of it comes to a dollar fruition in the world of investment.
Yep.
If you can write a program that will forecast the market or derivative of the market, then you will make a hell of a lot of money. The trick is which parameters would you consider?
But the parameters have to be put in advance, as you said. And so a computer, if you want to...
So it boils down to a relatively, would you agree that it boils down to a relatively simple equation? A simple,
it doesn't have to be simple.
Binary question.
It's definitely not It's definitely not simple,
Well,
but it's restricted.
Either you can or you cannot give it
Right.
infinite parameters.
Right.
That's where it is.
That's my argument. So you can't give it infinite parameters. So to put it in one sentence, a program system like a computer can engage in deduction but not induction. And that's the problem, yeah.
If a human were to grow up and live alone, without any exchange with another human, well, first of all, has that been tested to see what the human is able to learn by himself? And then the question would be, is it the fact that we limit the computer itself to learn, let's say, from itself or from what we give it, as opposed to learning, let's say, from another computer, and then from another computer, where the possibility of learning grows exponentially?
So, to the first part of the question, that is a philosophical position. And the position is that if a human were isolated in a cave for his or her entire life, that consciousness would not develop as we know it. That there is something to that. There's definitely a contingent of people who believe that. I'm not sure what I think about that. On the other side, you're saying, are robots at a disadvantage because we're out there socializing and the robot is stuck with the programming we gave the robot? Well, I mean, the robots are engaging with human beings all the time, and also many robots are engaging with other robots. They have this robot soccer team that engages with each robot, plays with the other robot. The problem is that it's learning, or what's going to get from the other robot, is exactly what you told it in advance. One robot's not going to do anything it wasn't already pre-programmed to do, so it's not going to teach anything new to another program pre-programmed only to accept what that other pre-programmed robot had to offer. Yeah?
Aside from the question of the moral issue, which is a very hard problem
Sure.
to figure out, but it's also the fact that human beings have sensory experiences. And I don't think that you can get robots to have the same sensory experiences. For instance, in your question of the bus driver, one of the things that, if I were investigating, I would try to see whether there was a smell of vodka on the driver's breath. Now, it may be that a robot could say, you give him a test, and if it comes out to X point something, then you know something. But I don't know whether he would be sensitive enough to look for that.
Unless he's programmed to do that.
So, two parts. First of all, the question of whether the machine has an internal experience, that's the argument from qualia. So that's the other part of the argument. And, I'm of the opinion that computers don't have that internal experience, that whatever's going on in the room is just symbol manipulation and not actually experiencing joy or cuteness or any of those feelings. So as for whether you could have it pre-programmed to do that, of course. You can have whatever rules in it you want. My point is that, yeah, maybe it'll solve that problem. But you give me any system, put all the rules you want in it for 1,000 years. Just program it and program it. Have it be programmed with the rules about what happens when you cut a lump of peanut butter in half, which is crazy that would ever even come up. But put that rule in too. There are still an innumerable number of problems that computer cannot even begin to approach because it's outside of its restricted rule-based system.
But that's true for humans also.
I don't think so.
There are problems that we can't solve because we don't know, we have enough information. I can't solve questions of why somebody died from a doctor. Right?
Sure, right. So you can't solve all these problems about the universe and so on. I agree. So the fact that we can't solve them doesn't mean we can't approach them. Doesn't mean we can't approach the limitless number of facts, ideas, concepts, resources out there and approach them. A computer can't even go outside of the pre-programmed approaches it has to any question. For a formal, if you want a mathematical approach to this question, there's Gödel's theorem, which states that for any mathematical system you create, and a computer program is a mathematical system of syntax and operators, for every such system that you create, there is a problem that that system cannot answer. And generally it involves the system sort of reflecting on its own processing. At some level it will always be unable to do that. So mathematically it's true that anytime you're bounding a system by these rules, there's something it can't do. As for us, when I say can't do, I agree. We can't necessarily get the answer right. We can't answer some of the mysteries of the universe, but I could know to go to a telescope. I can come up with theories. I can go out and, test those theories. Whereas a computer can't even approach it, is the difference. Yeah?
You say that you don't believe that this method will bring us to create consciousness like machines. Are there others who believe that this method can?
Yes. Ray Kurzweil, the inventor that I keep discussing, he believes that computers will take over and that human consciousness will be obsolete because machines will not only be conscious, they already have more processing power. So more processing power plus consciousness, and there's not much left for human beings to do.
How does he make that jump from the...
So he makes the jump by saying that understanding is symbol manipulation. That when we consciously think things, our thoughts, our ideas, our beliefs, these are all formal operators of relation, like the word T-R-E-E. Those four symbols correspond by some relational operator to bark and leaves and the building blocks of forests. And he thinks that is understanding, it is achievable, and we've already achieved it, and it's only getting better. Yeah.
The problem with that approach, of course, is that if you took a blind person and told him exactly what each parts of the tree are in terms of symbols, he'll never know what a tree actually is.
Exactly.
So
he doesn't have the qualia. It's like no matter how many Chinese symbols you show an English speaker, he's never going to understand Chinese if he only knows that one symbol goes to other symbols. And that's all the computer knows, is that one set of symbols, and the symbols I mean are zeros and ones, that this set of zeros and ones leads to this set of zeros and ones. That's how conversation programs work, how computers work, how Deep Blue works. They all work in exactly the same way. And no matter how complex or intricate the processing, it's always going to be limited and it will never achieve it, I think.